It's go time.
Welcome to the Third Down Gamble podcast with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham, with special guest Howie Mooney of the Sports Lunatics podcast and author of 5 books including An Unlikely Story.
Although it may be storming outside, we know that it's been hot in CFL centers as free agency has dominated the landscape. Coming up later, Howie Mooney of the Sports Lunatics podcast will join us to give us his insight. And Heath, when we talk about free agency, we kind of sometimes look at comparators and what did a team do last year? Well, Edmonton, for instance, went hard after Toronto last season. This season, they went after Hamilton. Not so much, but they sort of figured out what their offensive line was going to look like. But the Winniepg Blue Bombers, a team that typically is quiet with free agency, how do they compare to what they did the previous year?
They opened their wallets a bit more this year than they have in the past. And we know Mike O'Shea, Kyle Walters, that front office of the Winniepg Blue Bombers have really been confident in the core that they have built, and they've added pieces here and there. Let's look at last year. The big signings were James Vaughters for $160,000, Dylan Mitchell for $150,000, linebacker Jonathan Jones for $120,000, who hardly ever saw the field, Peyton Logan $110,000. Again, injuries. Trey Vauvel came in and knocked him out of a starting job. Jareth Stearns was a $90,000 or $190,000 receiver. They spent some money on some pieces. This year, I think they went hard after what they felt were needs. And you've got the biggest signing, Jarrell Broxton, on that offensive line for $250,000. You now have Broxton and Stanley Bryant as your tackles. That's a pretty good investment there.
But they also spent $235,000 for Jake Serezna, $222,000 for Tim White, $175,000 for Tommy Neal, and $135,000 for Jonathan Moxey. Now they spent money on Evan Holm to get him back with the team as well. And I just wonder, like, if you do quick math, that's three of those guys are up around $650,000, close to $700,000 before you get to the rest of the signings. So they spent $1 million, let's say, in extensions and free agency, just within about 5 to 6 people. Now add Zach Collaros' contract of about $750,000 to that mix. You've got a 1.75 out of 6.2 tied up in 6-7 people. That's not a lot of room for, and Brady Oliveira, let's toss him into this. Like you do that, and there's out of what you have left in your roster, 35, 45 people. There's not a lot of money to throw around. And is that going to create a crisis of cap where you've spent all this money on this small portion, but now in this big volume over here, you haven't got a lot left to throw it?
You're right. It does seem to be a bit of the BC Lions model, right? You talk about investing in a core few players. Matthew Betts and Nathan Rourke eat up a lot of that salary. Keon Hatcher in the mix as that receiver as well. They're not afraid to look at it that way. What it comes down to here is scouting and bringing in those young guys, especially American players that can fill the needs. And Winniepg has had some success with that in the past. Trey Vauvel last year is a fine example of that. I think of D. Alford, who they brought up as a unknown defensive back, who's now a starter for the Atlanta Falcons. They brought him in unknown. They need to hit some home runs in those positions to stay competitive. They've got the core. They've brought in some pieces that they absolutely love, that they think are going to shore up some of those weaknesses. But as you say, what does that do with those other positions?
When you look back to those, and I'll give credit to John Hodge, this is a fantastic piece, and you can read about it on 3 Down Nation, but just diving deeper into it, you look at the people that they signed last year. This is Vaughters, this is Mitchell, this is Jones, Logan, Stearns, and let's not forget, there was a quarterback that had a big fumble in the Grey Cup, Shea Patterson, that had moved over to Winniepg and got cut in training camp. None of them are with the team, and most of them didn't play half the season.
Vaughters and Stearns, I guess, would be the biggest impact of those players that they brought in last year. But none of them really were impactful. As I've said before, I believe James Vaughters had a down year. I don't think he fit into the scheme that Jordan Younger was calling on defense. And it's not a knock on the skills and ability of James Vaughters, and it's not a knock on the play calling of Jordan Younger. It's just those two didn't mesh well. I expect a bounce back year for Vaughters with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Jake Serezna is a totally different defensive lineman than James Vaughters, and I think he brings a different look and something that can be successful in a Jordan Younger defense. I look forward to seeing what he does.
Well, the one thing that a Jordan Younger defense relies upon is a very strong defensive line. And you mentioned that he needs that. Well, a lot of times they're dropping 9 and rushing 3. Well, one of them is going to be Willie Jefferson. Not usually the guy that's going to stop the running game, but he will pressure the quarterback. So who's going to work in the middle to take up all of that slack? And that's where Serezna is going to have to find his way.
He is, and that's what I'm excited to watch. And the nice thing with Serezna is you can run him up the middle, or you can put him at that other end and have him and Jefferson coming from the end rush positions, somebody else showing up the middle. So he's pretty flexible. He's a bit of a Swiss Army knife on that defensive line. He brings a lot of experience. He's 31 years old, and he's the type that's going to jump in there well. Receiving core wise, I think Tim White was a big signing, and Tommy Neild, of course, had that Western final clinching touchdown catch. He's a Canadian. Add those two with Nick Dembski and Ontario Wilson, that could be a pretty potent receiving core.
Is Tommy Neild going to be the guy that's going to replace Drew Wolodarski? He's going to be the type of guy that maybe isn't your primary, your secondary, but if you're running out of the pocket, there he is, and find him for 40 yards.
I believe that's why they brought him in. Kevin Sklercius was hoped to be that guy. Hasn't quite developed in his couple of seasons with the Bombers. He's still around and can learn from somebody like Tommy Neild and maybe fit into that position. But Neild right now, you're absolutely correct. He's the guy that they're looking for on those 2nd and 6. He's going to get to the sidelines, get you 7 yards, and move the chains.
Now, other free agents that they signed, and one of them out of Hamilton, Jonathan Moxey, Demario Houston leaves Winnipeg and goes to Ottawa. Again, another guy that's a veteran guy in that defense. Do you think that the Bombers are trusting that experience is going to outcount any age considerations?
I believe so. And again, Moxie's in that 30 to 32 age range as well. All of these free agents that they're bringing in are 30. Jarrell Broxton is the oldest one at 32 years old. So you're bringing some experience in. Losing Demario Houston, he put up flashy interception numbers in his previous seasons with the Bombers. Left for Calgary, came back to Winnipeg late in the season because they were decimated at defensive back and they needed bodies in there. Jonathan Moxey, in my opinion, is a step up from Demario Houston. Again, he's going to be somebody that can lead by example. And don't forget, this is a team that lost Terrell Ford to Edmonton in free agency, never really replaced him. And I think Moxey brings some of that stability.
Now, are you surprised that the Blue Bombers didn't maybe go after one of the free agent backups that were out there? Say a Jake Mayer, say a Taylor Powell, say somebody like that, because they all wound up in probably logical spots given their connections with coaches or offensive coordinators. But the Bombers kind of stayed pat with what they had, although Chris Streveler is still unsigned.
Who's to say they didn't make a pitch at these guys? They just didn't land them. Trey Ford, the BC Lions, did everything they could to lure him in. He was looking at that situation going, there's no way that I'm supplanting Nathan Rourke as the number one guy with this team. Let me look at an opportunity where I can fit in, and that was the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He's closer to home. Behind Zach Collaros right now, you've got Terry Wilson, who did suit up for a lot of games but didn't see a lot of action. And the Bombers, I don't believe, fully trust in the capabilities of Terry Wilson. When he has come into the lineup, they don't really get him throwing the ball very much.
Point back to the Grey Cup and that one opportunity he had there, and he didn't do much with it. But can you hold a guy for one series?
I don't think you can blame him. They are high on bringing in Bryce Perkins. He's the interesting addition to this quarterback room. MVP in the UFL last year. He's got a few starts and a Super Bowl ring in the NFL as well. Now, he didn't really contribute as a number one quarterback by any means in winning that Super Bowl with the Rams, but he's been through it. and that's a championship pedigree. I think that's the likely number 2, but we'll see what happens. They've also brought in Peyton Thorne, another quarterback out of Auburn University, only 24 years old versus 29 years old for Perkins. There's some youth there, but there isn't a lot of CFL experience behind Zach Collaros, and that has to be a concern.
Now, Taylor Elgersma is always a name that comes up because the Bombers did draft him. He's still trying to apply his trade in the NFL, and he reminds me of Nathan Rourke, where Nathan Rourke did the tour, tried to find anybody and everybody that would give him a tryout and see if he could get a contract, and Elgersma is following that same path. He's throwing spaghetti against the wall. Maybe it'll stick somewhere, but if it doesn't, how long does Elgersma wait this out? Because some of his best years are starting to while away chasing the dream.
He's still only 23 years old. He'll be 24 by the time CFL training camps open. You don't see a lot of quarterbacks develop into number 1 guys until kind of 28-ish in the CFL these days.
Unless you're Ricky Ray.
Unless you're Ricky Ray. There's always an exception to the rule. But I think there's a chance we see Elgersma maybe even late in the 2026 season having a look in Winnipeg. If nothing comes to fruition south of the border, 2027, you're going to see him, I believe, in camp competing for a job. It's an exciting time. We talk about Nathan Rourke, his brother Curtis Rourke. The Rough Riders drafted him as well. He's also bouncing around the NFL a little bit. Those are 2 guys that could be real exciting future for some CFL franchises.
Be really cool if the Rourke brothers had to play in a playoff game against each other. There's been some banter and some discussion about the whole Ed Hervey tampering window, or Ed Hervey window as it's colloquially known. Does it really start when the prescribed start time is availed to everybody? In other words, let's say that you could start discussion points at noon Eastern on February 1st, just for sake of argument. Are teams talking to players before that, and is it a problem?
Yes and yes. I think you'd be naive to think all of these conversations started at noon on February 1st, given that there was a lot of signings announced within the first couple of hours of that window being open. Teams are going to be very careful about how they navigate this. I'm sure there's a lot of conversations with player agents and some, in quotes, hypothetical situations where a team approaches an agent and says, hey, do you think your guy might be interested in coming to play for us for X? The agent then might have a bit of a hypothetical conversation with a player. And so I don't know if it's the formal, this is what we're going to offer you is happening early, but there's a lot of legwork in the background that's happening so that when that window opens, those top free agents are pretty much at their decision of where they're going to sign.
Is there maybe some sort of need to address this and say that the team that has the players' rights up to that point has that window clarified, classified, and quantified to end at, say, January 31st at noon, and that any chance for you to talk to anybody on that football team prior to that moment has to go through permission slips from the team itself?
I think so. I think for the clarity of it and the perceived fairness, there needs to be some of those standards in place. Right now, the whole idea of this window came about because of some tampering with players under Odell Willis, for example, and other players under contract.
And Ed Hervey. And the reason why we have it in the first place, because Ed Hervey went after Odell Willis moments after.
Exactly. So I think there does need to be transparency and clarity in it for the reputation of the league and how they go about these things.
I can see that, but I think maybe just as a courtesy and definitely just to ease some of the angst over it, maybe you do have to, as you do with coaches, you have to get the permission of the general manager and say, look, we're interested during the window to talk to this person. Can we let them know that we're interested? Maybe have a more policing of this ahead of that February 1st. I'm just using it as a date. February 1st deadline where everything starts, just to ease the angst over some fans thinking that, well, it could be as December and this guy's long gone already.
what we run into already is there are clear indications that teams are going to move on from certain players. Sometimes they grant those releases outright well enough ahead of time to allow them to land. And we saw that with Tim White, for example, leaving Hamilton and joining the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That was before this window happened.
Well, and in the middle of it, the Edmonton Elks released Jake Ceresna once they got word that he had pretty much agreed to terms with the Blue Bombers, and they said, fine, we're not going to fight it.
Exactly. And I think that was a classy move by the Edmonton Elks to get out ahead of it. But you hear these rumors. We knew one of the worst kept secrets was Trey Ford and Edmonton. We knew that relationship was over. They strung it along until just before that roster bonus was due and cut him loose. Now, as you're saying, had a permission window almost been granted ahead of time, Hamilton could have approached Edmonton and said, we are under the understanding that maybe Trey Ford isn't going to be somebody that you're going to offer a contract. We are interested. Can we have these conversations? Can we have these discussions?
And at least get some preliminaries done above board, if you want to call it that. I don't know that the league is that interested in it. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference, because ultimately, once the window opens up, you have to register any offers with the league and with the PA. I think it was Demario Houston with the Ottawa Redblacks. The BC Lions chased him, but they never registered the offer, so they were never obliged to follow through.
I guess one of the issues you might run into, and something to be careful of, is they've already opened up this negotiation window, week or 10 days or whatever that situation is. How far earlier are we going to push things by asking for permissions, teams cutting players, all of those sorts of things? There needs to be a line in the sand. The league can do a better job of policing how teams are approaching that line now.
Well, we already have windows where teams can grant permission to players to go chase NFL opportunities. And they, especially guys that are under contract, they can go down to the States and see if there's any opportunity availing from any number of teams that want to. But once that window closes and you haven't signed, you're under contract to come back. And maybe, not that you would be obliged to have to return to the football team, but just to, again, clarify it so that the general managers know what's going on. You might have to move up maybe the whole idea of when a player knows that this team is probably not interested in re-signing with you. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to cut you, because maybe the market doesn't scare them after the fact and they still go after you anyway. But at least just have the teams that are interested in these prelim discussions just say, hey, Jeremy O'Day, or hey, Sean Burke, or hey, Ryan Dinwiddie, or somebody, we're interested. Are you guys going to cut them or not? And if you're not, just let us know so we know what we're going to do. And maybe they do that already informally. And coming up after the break, it's going to be Howie Mooney of the Sports Lunatics podcast to talk to us about free agency.
Hey, George Hopkins, Calgary Stampeders equipment manager. You're listening to the Third Down podcast. Enjoy it. I do.
Joining us now is Howie Mooney. Howie, great to have you back. Lots happening in the free agent world that is the CFL in February, and boy, big players, the Ottawa Redblacks, and they went after what used to be their namesakes, the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Well, having gone to a bunch of games last year at what used to be Lansdowne Park, what used to be Frank Clair Stadium, what is now TD Place, they can't be any worse. They can't be any worse than they were last year. They got new coach, new coaching staff. You know, it's going to be interesting. We all know how important continuity is in football. Having a consistent lineup, you know, from one game to the next, 1 year to the next. It's not going to be that way this year. It might be a process of learning under Dinwiddie, but we'll see what happens. As I say, it can't be any worse than it was last year. And I'm looking at some of the guys that Ottawa got, and I have to feel fairly optimistic in terms of them improving. I don't know how well or how much they'll improve. I feel much better about the Ottawa Redblacks in 2026 than I did in 2025.
Is there somebody on that list of free agents that you're most excited to see join the Redblacks?
AJ Allen. AJ Allen as a Canadian linebacker, not only does he improve their linebacking core right away, but he's a Canadian, so he frees up spots in the lineup for the ratio, and so I think he's going to be an important player in a number of different ways. I really look forward because he's coming into that age window where he's going to be at the best part of his career. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing him be in Ottawa for a few years. I know he signed a 2-year contract with Ottawa. And as he said in an interview recently, they called me at noon. As soon as the noon window opened, they called him. And so he said that really made me happy. And he's from Burlington, which is, it's not close, but it's not really far either. He talked about growing up in Burlington, and another old Ottawa Rough Rider, Tony Gabriel, was from Burlington as well. So hopefully there's something in the water, touch wood, that can bring success to Ottawa where we haven't had it in a while in this city.
Him, and of course, there's CJ Rivas that comes out of that defensive backfield with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, Rivas,
that's right, yeah.
At the end of the season, he was kind of the utility knife. He was the one that was playing linebacker, safety. He move up to halfback. He could be anywhere. They got him on a 1-year deal in Ottawa.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because, as you were aware, my recent book, An Unlikely Story, that talks about the 1981 Ottawa Rough Riders, had a couple of guys that could play in the defensive backfield, or they could play almost as a linebacker on a blitz or a fake blitz or whatever. And so I know nothing's ever the same, and everything changes all the time. But there are certain constants in football, and if you can fool an offense every once in a while, you can get some success on defense. And so, as you say, that kind of Swiss Army knife guy could be invaluable in not just an Ottawa defense, but in any defense.
Just looking at the sheer volume of free agents that Ottawa has signed so far, and obviously Coach Dinwiddie is, I would say, fairly comfortable with the offense. There's a couple of tweaks here and there, but 8 free agents on the defense that he's signed so far, that's going to be drastically different than what we saw on the field in 2025.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Heath. It's going to be different. I mean, like I said, it can't be any worse than it was last year. And it wasn't the defense's fault necessarily last year. Special teams was horrid, which was odd since Bob Dice was the head coach last year, and he was a special teams guy. But Rick Campbell came back, and he was coaching special teams last year. And special teams were just awful. And I mean, I can remember seeing against Toronto, a Derek Sluka run one back, a blocked or deflected field goal, run back for a touchdown. Just other games where I think it was Vavel.
Trey Vavel, yes.
Same thing. It was a gong show sometimes going to games. And, Ottawa would dig themselves such a big hole early, first quarter, second quarter, and not ever be able to dig themselves out. Like I say, it can't be any worse than it was last year.
Well, with a new head coach, and especially Ryan Dinwiddie, who's used to winning.
Yes.
And he brings a different attitude to that entire franchise. Have you noticed that in the city? Have you noticed that people have said, whoa, there's something cooking here?
Football talk is not yet ramped up. Last week there was a little bit at free agency time, and they had some guys on sports radio in Ottawa, and I hope that the 1200 lasts a little while because there's talk that Bell might be folding that up soon, but that's our conduit to CFL football in Ottawa, and so I hope it sticks around for a long time. I started there back in 98 and 99 as a morning show guy. There hasn't been a lot of football talk. The 67s are playing well in the OHL right now. The Senators are still trying to find their feet, and the Olympics are on right now, and that's been a big thing, a big deal as we record this. So there was some football talk last week when the free agency window opened and when the legal tampering window opened. I haven't really heard a lot, and when I'm in the car, I've got it on. I've got the sports station on all the time.
There have been a lot of moves all around.
Yes.
And, I mean, Ottawa, what I thought initially they would do was go after offensive linemen. Well, they didn't do it until basically today.
Yeah, you're right. But getting Greg Bell is a big step. William Stanback last year, I mean, his age was starting to show, and he's a free agent, and I'd be surprised if anybody really goes after him hard or at all. I found it to be a disappointment last year, especially after some of the great years he had in Montreal. But Greg Bell is a guy I'm looking forward to seeing. If they can get improved play out of their offensive line, it'll help immensely for establishing the run and then trying to establish a pass. I mean, that O-line last year had a really, really difficult time, and it showed in Drew Brown's performance and Dustin Crum's performance. And Dustin Crum is gone, as you know, and Jake Mayer is now in Ottawa, and it'll be interesting to see if he can revert to his 2024 form at all or earlier, but we'll see what happens.
Looking at that offensive line, I mean, there's some pretty well-known names on there. Peter Godber, Drew DeJarle, Dino Boyd, Darius Bladdock. Is it a cohesion issue that you think maybe one more year of the bulk of these guys and adding a few guys into the mix might help solidify that offensive line?
Yeah, like I said earlier, continuity is a big deal in football, probably more so than anywhere else. And we've all gone back in our memory banks and we've seen teams that took a while to gel together, but once they did, then they were okay. It'll be interesting to see how Dinwiddie and his coaching staff get this team together. Offensive line play can be difficult. I've got a buddy who was he played in the CFL for 4 years. Warner Miles was at Ottawa U, had a really good career at Ottawa U. He was an offensive guard, and they moved him over to center one time because their center got injured, and he found that to be completely different, completely confounding. Every time I've talked to guys who played on the offensive line, they seem to me to be the most intelligent guys anywhere because they have so much to remember in terms of blocking schemes for run, blocking schemes for pass, all kinds of different things that they have to remember at a split second. And when they're banging heads and trading paint in the pit, it can be tough sometimes, to just even retain your brain matter. Let alone thinking of things that, I've got to take this guy on this play. I got to take this guy on that play. Who's got that guy, all that other stuff. And the fact that there's only 2 preseason games to get everything together, it's almost like the first 4 games of the regular season are preseason as well. Just getting everybody trying to get on the same page and everything like that. I think it's going to be a growing process for the team in Ottawa and for the fans to accept the team in Ottawa. The fans in Ottawa, I think they're not the most patient when it comes to waiting for mediocrity to turn to success. My dad used to say when my brother and I were kids, and we had season tickets in the end zone for under Leo's Leaders, the Royal Bank program they had back then. We got them for $5 because we opened an account there. But if there was a game that we didn't want to go to or we didn't feel like traveling in the rain or something like that, my dad would say, typical Ottawa, fair weather fans. And he'd shame us into going to the games, taking the bus to the games ourselves. I mean, Ottawa loves the shiny toy when it comes to sports. And when the Red Blacks last year were not the shiny toy, it felt like a lot of people got down really, really early and really quickly.
We've talked a lot about offensive line. They did sign Gregor McKellar from Edmonton, who had been with the Toronto Argonauts. Yeah. And they also signed Martez Ivey, who had been an Western Division All-Star in 2024. And that's 2 guys from the Elks that they brought this way, and both in excess of 300 pounds.
This is the thing. Dinwiddie is not a stupid guy. You give him an offensive line. Everything starts with the offensive line. Whether it's a successful pass, successful run, everything starts with the offensive line. And if you can get that line working together, working properly, Ottawa could be the surprise team in the East.
Well, if that offensive line comes together, the offense could be a lot of fun to watch. You mentioned Greg Bell added to the mix and Jake Mayer is the backup quarterback, but that receiving core with Khalil Pimpleton, Justin Hardy, Eugene Lewis, and they've added Aiden Eberhardt into the mix.
He had a 19.2 yards per catch average, which was the highest in the league among anybody that had enough catches to be eligible for that. I mean, he could be one of those guys that becomes one of those the people that the fans really take to. One of the receivers, one of the offensive players that the fans really take to. And one of the guys on defense that I was thinking of was Habakkuk Baldonado. If he's given the right circumstances to grow in, I could see him becoming one of the fan favorites this year, next year, and if he wants to stay here as long as he wants, then he'll be a favorite. I just have that feeling about watching him play that he will be that guy.
If we move along the QEW, I guess it goes to Ottawa. I'm not sure.
Kind of circuitously.
Circuitously. Well, we'll take a via train then. The Argonauts' new head coach, because of the departure of Dinwiddie, and now the Argonauts are trying to find their way with what they want to do next. And there's sort of a mild change, but they brought back a lot of veterans.
Yes. I was surprised, though, to see them let Dejan Brissett go. He's a local guy, and he was just starting to come into his own. And I can remember one day I was living in Toronto at the time, or Greater Toronto area at the time. We got to the stadium a little early, and we saw his parents dropping him off at the stadium. And it was so cool. You know, they've got this local guy who had a good year last year. I mean, not a great year yet, but a good year. And he's the kind of guy that you could build a fan base around. For them to let him go the way they did, it kind of makes me sad, because as an Ottawa fan and living in Toronto for 25 years, I went to games because I felt it was important that the Toronto Argonauts be a strong franchise in the CFL. And I said this many times before. You remember, I don't know if you remember 1971 or not, but they went to the Grey Cup. They were the kind of team with Leo Cahill as the coach and with guys with long hair and doing whatever they wanted to do outside of the stadium. But then once they got in, they played the game well. They were a good team. They'd come into your town. They'd knock you down, steal your girlfriend right off on their Harleys, and throw away their whiskey bottles. Everybody hated them, but everybody went out to watch them play. And I've always thought, if you got a team in Toronto like that again, it would be the best thing for the CFL. Everybody hates the New York Yankees in baseball. Everybody would hate a really good Toronto Argonauts team if they had the right personalities. Everybody in Canada hated Toronto at that time, but everybody went out to watch them. Attendance in the CFL at that time was incredible. And I've always thought, if the Argonauts could be that team, not just a good team, but kind of a good, mean team, then it would be a great, great thing for the league.
And you're talking about the 71 Argonauts, and of course, Leon McQuay slips, and the Argos fall. If Leon McQuay doesn't fumble that football, what happens in that game?
There's a great book by a guy who's a friend of mine, Craig Wallace, on that team and that window of time, not just 71, but right before it and right after it. And it's a great book. It's called A Slip in the Rain. And if you are able to go get it, go find it. Go find mine too, An Unlikely Story. It's on Amazon. But my thing is sports history, and I love talking about the past. But we could do this for hours and talk about these old teams in the CFL. I mean, talking about guys like Jeff Garcia and stuff like that, guys that went down to the NFL and were successful. And we can talk about Doug Flutie too. And I remember there was a legendary guy in Ottawa, or journalist in Ottawa, sports journalist, Earl McRae. And when I sat in the press box at Rough Rider games in 92 and 93, he sat right in front of me so I could read his column over his shoulder that he was writing for the next day. But Earl was a guy, I remember when Calgary, I think it was Calgary at the time, Flutie was playing with in 92, 93. It might have been BC.
Calgary had Flutie in 92.
We go down to the locker room, and we're all waiting because Flutie's in the shower. Earl McRae goes into the shower in his trench coat with his pad, and he's taking notes as he's asking Flutie questions in the shower. After that, I always said to myself, "What would Earl do? What would Earl do?" And I mean, there were things that I did probably that would you'd not be able to do today.
Mike Miller, though, doesn't seem to be that type of guy that's swashbuckling. He's very steady.
Yes,
clearly has an idea of what he wants to see on offense. Now he's got his main two quarterbacks back, but he's also got Dakota Shepley coming back from the NFL, which will help that offensive line.
And he's got Jonathan Kongbo coming into Toronto from Edmonton as well, which I think is going to be a huge signing for them. They need something there in Toronto to not only ignite the team and generate success on the field, but they need something to ignite the fans in Toronto and bring people out to the stadium as well. And I hope, for their sake, The problem with Toronto this year, though, is that with the World Cup coming, they're not going to have any home games for a while.
That's true.
But it is what it is.
You couple that with the success of the Toronto Blue Jays last year, and they're looking like they're ramping up again this year as well. It could be a tough draw to get those fans out for Argos games.
I worry about the Blue Jays, though. And I mean, I know we're getting off topic, but I worry about the Blue Jays this year, trying to duplicate the success they had in 2025.
It'll be tough. It'll be really tough because nobody sits still in that division.
No.
The Argonauts, though, I think you're looking at a different audience. The people that typically go to Blue Jays games, I don't know if they're going to Argonauts football games because the price point just isn't the same.
It's very different. And the people that the Blue Jays are aiming toward are younger. And as somebody who went to a lot of Ottawa games last year, the CFL needs to do that too. And I know that Stuart Johnson is trying to address that with his changes to the game. I'm not really in favor of a lot of them, but anyway, I think I know that he has to, and the league has to, become a draw for younger people. And I know that in Ottawa they've got a couple of terraces set up at field level, where people can go and stand around and have a beer, and you can see the game close up and everything like that. And I got to spend some time last year on the north side, which is the one of the sidelines. It was fun. It was great. That was the Winniepg game, and that's where Vavel ran one of them back. And it's fun to go to the games. I got a package with a group of people, and we'd go a few hours early. They've got restaurants set up all around the stadium there. We'd stop and on a patio and have a couple of drinks and have something to eat before we went into the game, and then you can sit and enjoy the game. And then it's so easy to get out of there once if you park a little far away, or there are buses that'll bring you into the stadium. It's pretty easy to get in and out of there. It's just I know we're going to go back to Toronto, but in Ottawa, get success on the field, and it'll bring people into the park. I was going to say same in Toronto, but it has to be a little more than just winning. There has to be some flash to it to get people out there too.
And one of the things that the Argonauts are struggling with is they're getting an aging receiving core. Now, Mackay Polk, okay, he's good and he's ready to go. But Tavares Daniels, is he going to have a job at the end of this? Because he's at the wrong end of his career if he wants to stay in Toronto.
And football is a brutal game on a body. How many guys have we seen look great at 24 and then at 27, it's like they're done? If you have a career that lasts you until you're 30, it's almost like you've beaten the odds in football. That's how it is. And as you said about Tavares Daniels, you're right. I have concerns about his ability to reach back and be the same guy, the same receiver that he was a few years ago.
Let's move to the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Now, that's a team that won first place last year. But
yes.
They made a move with getting Trey Ford in, but they had to give up Taylor Powell to get him.
A lot of change in Hamilton. A lot of movement and a lot of roster instability between last year and this year for a team that finished first. Carrick Wheatfall is going to be interesting to watch as well. Curly Gittins. I really look forward to seeing how Curly Gittins is able to play in that offense. I really liked him when he was in Toronto. He's an Ottawa guy, but he was really, really good, had really good dependable hands in 2022. Sadly, he hasn't been able to get back to that level of play that he was at in 2022, but I'm hoping that in Hamilton that he's able to resurrect what he had a couple of years ago.
Well, with Edmonton, he had Jordan McSimic, and McSimic is kind of an outside-in guy where he'll hand the ball off on first down, but he's going to look for his wide receivers first on second down.
Yeah.
They've kept Shamar Bridges in the mix as well. You mentioned Carrick Wheatfall, speed to burn, but I don't know. He showed flashes in Winniepg, but never really dug in and established himself as a go-to guy. Now you've got Bo Levi Mitchell throwing him the ball, and we'll see how he fits in.
I'm curious to see if he can maintain the upward trajectory that he started last year. I mean, 42 catches, 655 yards, and 4 TDs. It's not bad for a guy who's a secondary or tertiary receiver on a team like Winniepg. I'm hoping for his sake and for Hamilton's sake that, and I've got a buddy who's a diehard Ticats fan, and he always teases me and I always tease him. We go back and forth, but I really appreciate his fierce fandom, and for his sake and for Ticats' sake, I hope that that Wheatfall is able to begin or continue his upward trajectory as a receiver.
The Montreal Alouettes, who hit the waves pretty early with the releasing of Darnell Sankey. He's wound up in British Columbia. But now Marc-Antoine Dequoy is no longer in that defensive backfield. Deontay Ruffin is no longer there. They've given up a few pretty good players.
And I don't know if they've been able to replace them with players of equal talent. Dustin Crum is going to come in as a backup quarterback. And I feel that if Dustin Crum could have had more reps last year, he could have been the first string guy in Ottawa. But it was always like he'd be in for a half, or he'd be in and he would just try and dink and dunk all the time instead of try one downfield to open things up in the backfield. Teams knew what he was going to do. If they can kind of free up his game, and I don't know how much he'll get in Montreal, but given the state of quarterbacks in the league, you're only one hit away from being the regular guy.
Or one hamstring.
Yeah. But I think Crum has it in him to be okay. Montreal's another team that they have to be really, really good for people to come out. And that city last year, I think there was one game where there was a bus strike and nobody could get to the park. And it's odd, but given where the stadium is, and I mean, if you guys have been there, you know where it is.
Up on the hill.
It can be difficult to get to, but I mean, it's a beautiful spot.
It is. It's amazing up there.
I love Montreal. I love the city of Montreal. I love the food. I love everything there. It's awesome.
You brought up a really interesting point about Dustin Crum. And I think back to the game that the Red Blacks played in BC, where in the first half, it looked like Ottawa was going to get clocked. They just didn't have anything. And all of a sudden in the second half, Dustin Crum is like, okay, I'm going to throw it deep, see what happens. And they made a game of it.
And he has that in him. He has the ability, I think, to be a good quarterback. He needs the reps, though.
But what was it design, though, that started this way? That they said, we want you just to do this, and all of a sudden, oh, crap, we're too far behind. Now we got to throw it. And when he gets the chance.
That's part of the problem. Open it up a little earlier, and then you have ways to run. You have ways to throw short passes. But you have to throw it downfield in order to open that stuff up.
Maybe with Anthony Calvillo calling the shots, maybe that happens for him if he gets into play.
Well, Anthony Calvillo is a smart enough guy that he can affect change that way. That's fine. I always believe that Dustin Crum had the tools. It's just will they give him the toolbox?
The thing I've always admired about Dustin Crum is fear doesn't seem to come into play at all. He's not afraid to take those chances, and we saw him lead comebacks against Winniepg. We saw him, as you mentioned, that game against BC. You give him that opportunity. Sometimes he's not the best at finding the open receiver. He gives one or two looks and has that tendency, much like Chris Streveler, to tuck and run at times. But you give him enough time back there and weapons to work with, he's not afraid to play that position and to take those chances.
Yeah, give him some blocking, and something good may happen. I think that in Montreal too, I had a point and now I've forgotten what it was, but in Montreal, he may get the time, given that, like I said, quarterback, you're the second string quarterback until the first string quarterback gets hurt, and then you're in. And I think that he could be in a lot more than he's out.
Well, especially we don't know where Alexander is in his recovery completely,
right,
and whether that hamstring has healed enough for even training camp. But he says on social media he's getting there and everything's going well. But if you're the Alouettes, you better coach up your backup, because you may not have him, just like last year where went periods with McLeod Bethel-Thompson having to take the reins. Caleb Evans came in, played a quarter, and then blew out his knee. Very unfortunate, but they had to keep working around a starting quarterback that was on the shelf.
Well, even when Drew Brown was healthy last year, Dustin Crum always had to be ready, because you never knew when Drew Brown was going to go down. And I think that Crum has that kind of mindset that he can do it. But as you said, will the play design allow him to excel? Will the offensive line allow him to excel? So many different aspects. And quarterback, it's not just the one guy. Everybody has to kind of work to become comfortable with him as well. And how long will that take to have happen as well?
Now, Jake Maier, we kind of skipped over him a little bit with Ottawa. He comes out of Saskatchewan, previously in Calgary, but Ryan Dinwiddie and him have worked together, and he knows the Dinwiddie system.
Yes, and that's not a bad thing. I hope, for Ottawa's sake and for Jake Maier's sake, that he is able to kind of recapture what he had when he was good in Calgary, when he was a starter. He didn't have that last year, and it seemed like he didn't have that opportunity either.
There was a lot of belief that he was getting gun shy, that even in his time in Calgary, his last season,
yes,
he had the most completed passes behind the line of scrimmage.
Right.
You just can't live like that in the CFL. When he had his success in Calgary, he was slinging it. He was throwing it deep.
And getting first downs. And that's the most important thing in the CFL is to get first downs. You got to keep the ball moving. And if you're throwing behind the line of scrimmage all the time, it's not going to be good for anybody.
Third down.
Moving out west, let's start with those Saskatchewan Roughriders who are the Grey Cup champions. We've already documented what Ottawa took out of that defense, but the Edmonton Elks went after Malik Carney, and they seem to be ecstatic that they've got a big personality as well as a big defensive end.
Well, the best thing that Saskatchewan did was they kept Keyshawn Johnson, they kept AJ Ouellette, they kept Keon Schaefer-Baker, they re-signed Samuel Emelis as well. And so those four guys are so important. But as you said, are they going to be able to keep points off the board with their defense having been not decimated necessarily, but certainly affected?
Well, even last year, the Rough Riders were in the most games that were decided in the last 3 minutes, where Calgary went there 5 times, Saskatchewan was there 12. So already they were kind of cutting it close. Now, if you've had holes in that defense, of course, a new defensive coordinator as well.
The thing, though, is that the players that gives the players confidence when they're able to do that. Now, you also know that you get on a slippery slope if you let that happen too often, where you're going into a 3-point game, in the last 2 minutes every time. It could just as easily go the other way and turn into a loss instead of a win. That's the thing.
You start looking at those departures on defense, and we've talked about Revis and Allen and Baldonado. Malik Carney, I think, is a huge loss as well. They brought in James Waters from Winniepg to maybe stop the bleeding on that defensive departures a little bit. I would say Waters underperformed in Winniepg, given what he showed in Calgary in previous seasons, but Winnipeg's defensive scheme is a lot different and only rushing 3 guys a lot of the time. So I expect a bounce back here for James Waters, and the Riders are going to need to rely on that.
When I was looking at lists of key free agents, Waters' name came up on a lot of those lists. And Josh Woods, I don't know how much playing time he got in BC, but I'm hoping that he can help them as well. Tyron Vrede out of Ottawa, he's a global linebacker. But as you said, Waters and on the D-line and Josh Woods as a linebacker, I'm hoping that they're able to help, or they're able to pick up whatever slack that comes from the departures of the other guys.
Well, you made mention, too, about the fact that maybe the first 4 games of the season, teams are still trying to figure themselves out. And a team that can stay together,
yeah,
maybe the BC Lions would be the best example of this, will get the jump on everybody else. And talking about BC, Nathan Rourke is there, great, but if anything happens to him, who's their quarterback?
But Nathan Rourke signed an extension, and he took less money than he could have got so that the BC Lions could attract other players and bring in guys and have the money to do that. You don't see that very often, but when you do see it, it's almost like one of these things where it can breed a lot of good feeling on the team, and that good feeling can translate into success as well.
But is Chase Bryce the man to back him up?
This is it's a flip of the coin. I mean, you guys probably know more about him than I do, but I don't know that much about him. Is anybody the man to back up Nathan Rourke?
Well, apparently the Lions were very interested in trying to get Trey Ford from Edmonton in free agency. He chose the Hamilton Tiger Cats. That does leave a gaping hole for the Lions. And the other big shoes to fill, Jarrell Broxton on that offensive line.
Yes.
That left tackle protecting Nathan Rourke's blind side gone. They are going to have to come with a solution to fill that and shore up that offensive line.
Yeah, we'll see. They kept James Butler, and we'll see if the O-line is good enough to allow him to be the James Butler that we've seen in the past. You know, you look at what they've got on defense, what they added on defense, Darnell Sankey and Deontay Ruffin from, as free agents. That's not going to hurt them defensively. But as you said, the offensive line could be the big question mark for BC.
Well, it seems like BC has gone veteran-laden in their defensive secondary. TJ Lee ups, but he's mid-30s. Guys all over that are dotting it that are definitely up there in experience, and maybe that's a Mike Benavides thing. He wants veterans back there.
True, but when you get guys who's a whole bunch of guys whose ages start with 3, you might be playing with fire a little bit. You might be rolling the dice a little bit. BC is not a bad team. If a couple of things fall right, if some of those 3-point leads late in games don't fall the right way for Saskatchewan, and they fall the right way for BC, we could see some upheaval in the West. I mean, at this time in the season, I think every team is looking at their roster and thinking, I'm happy. I'm happy right now with what we have. The real evidence falls in August and September, when your records are more solidified, your positions in the standings might be more solidified as well. And so for us doing this and having this conversation, it's fun, but I think the real fun comes when you get some team that you had no expectations for, and you get to Labor Day and they're at the top of a division. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of weird things we can see happen, because as I've said in the past, and as you've said in the past, we've all said it in the past, our parents all said it in the past, anything can happen in the CFL.
Well, you could have Craig Dickinson as your head coach too, and forget that there is a back half of the schedule you have to worry about.
Yeah.
I think I think what you're alluding to, it talks a lot about those Montreal Alouettes of 2023 as well, right? The team of misfits that nobody gave a chance to.
Yes.
They hit Labor Day and just said, no, we're not losing another game. Walked on through the playoffs and on to the Grey Cup.
Well, Labor Day, too, is always the time where the NFL cuts come in. And I mean, we used to see it like an airlift. It hasn't been as much of an airlift in recent years. It's always a time when teams shore up their rosters. You've got injuries from the first 2 months. It's always a time to kind of fix things up and shore things up. It always has been historically, and I think it always will be in terms of the Canadian Football League.
And the Calgary Stampeders, a team that really started to turn the corner last year, and especially the big wins over Saskatchewan, where they were the only team to wipe the Saskatchewan Roughriders off the map 3 times. The Stampeders, relatively quiet. Dejan Brissett shows up, but they don't do a heck of a lot more in terms of going after big-time free agents.
It's true, and I'm looking at my list of big free agents, and Calgary's got the shortest list. BC's got a short list, but they went with they re-signed guys, and they've brought in some guys who are veterans. But yeah, the Calgary list is the shortest.
I mean, they did a good job of re-signing some guys early. They didn't really go out and make a big splash in free agency. They kept Derek Moncrief, Dedrick Mills, those types of guys that were important on that team. I mean, they were a surprise team, I would say, in 2025, given their 23 and 24 seasons with a half dozen wins a year. I think a lot of people were taken by surprise, but Dave Dickinson seems...
Well, let's not forget Markel Lee, who really started to shine as a linebacker last year. Now they've left, speaking of linebackers, there's a guy that used to play in Winnipeg that wound up in Calgary, Adam Bighill. Doesn't look like anyone's re-signing him either.
This might be the end of the road for Adam Bighill.
How old is he now, though?
He is 37 years old.
Yeah, that's getting up there.
Especially for a linebacker, because of the beating you take, because everything runs through there almost.
But I look at the list of guys that Calgary either re-signed or extended, and they got a long list. I'm starting at the top alphabetically. Clark Burns, Bryce Bell, Eric Brooks, Bailey Devine Scott, Clarence Hicks, Thomas Jack Curdilla, Tevin Jones, Daniel Joseph, Markel Lee, Dedrick Mills, Derek Moncrief, or Godfrey Onika, sorry, Micah Tights, Charles Wiley, Kyle Wilson. They've kept a lot of the foundation that they started with or they had finished with last year, and so I don't think that's ever a bad thing when it comes. Like, it's great to bring in great players. Can you get them to work cohesively together? If you've got a group, as you said, Calgary wasn't a bad team. They came into some bad luck. Remember that terrible rain game against Ottawa last year where the fans couldn't even stay in the stands and Ottawa beat them? A game that Ottawa should never have won or Calgary should never have lost. That's how it happened. That's how it turned out. It's the CFL. Calgary has a team that should win the games that they should win, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way.
I'm very curious to see what happens with Damien Alford because he really, at times last year, showed brilliance. And thinking back to the smoke game or the day after against Saskatchewan where he ripped that Rough Rider defense. He's down in the NFL right now, but I wonder if he is going to be coming back. And if you add that to those names that you listed, all those receivers, they're going to be stacked.
Yeah, they'll have too many guys for the room that they have on their roster.
Well, Reggie Bagleton should be back too.
Yes. And that's the thing about Canadian football guys who go down to the States on NFL tryouts. There aren't a lot of Alex Singletons in there. More of them come back than stick down there. Like you said, it'll be interesting to see what happens with those guys.
Edmonton, everybody talks about this being the Ed Hervey window with the tampering that quote goes on. Now, I'm glad you said that A.J. Allen was called right at noon on opening day because there was a lot of speculation that maybe these calls were happening much before and they were only being announced after the fact. I look at the Edmonton Elks and they wanted to get two things, one bigger and second nastier. And you look at who they signed, I imagine they've got what they wanted.
Well, you look at Malik Carney right there, right at the beginning, at the top. I think Joe Robustelli's going to help. Austin Mack, guy that's going to be all right. I mean, they're middle of the league guys in terms of yardage.
Coulter Woodmansey out of Hamilton was a big coup, and of course Taylor Powell out of Hamilton. In fact, they went hard after the Tiger Cats, and of course Ed Hervey, prior to coming back to Edmonton, spent some time in Hamilton, was familiar with these people.
Well, I'm looking at guys they got from Hamilton. Brandon O'Leary-Orange, Jordan Murray, Brendan
Bordner.
Yes. I gotta start writing bigger.
Well, the interesting thing I find with Edmonton, and you talked a little bit about it with the continuity, and Edmonton has had their years of turmoil and turnover.
Oh,
and it looks like they've made some tweaks this year, but unlike you take the Ottawa Redblacks, for example, who had a huge list of free agent signings, Edmonton seems to be a lot more strategic this year. And I think you're getting that second full year with the new leadership in place. They've got the roster that they're happy with, and now they're just trying to fine tune it.
I thought last year was going to be a better year for Edmonton than it was. Just watching them in the first half of the season, I think, as you said, continuity is a big deal. And if they can continue that trajectory, I always think of things on a curve like this, where they start off kind of gradually improving and then more and more and more until it becomes like a half of a parabola. And I think that Edmonton is that kind of team where they could be on the very swift upward trajectory.
Well, Austin Mack in the receiving core is going to be massive because he did have some time with Cody Fajardo in Montreal. If they find that magic again, then they've got a deep threat that they've been desperately looking for because Eugene Lewis was there, didn't work out so much. Keon Julian Grant is still there.
Yeah. Mack
Could really be a game breaker for them.
He could be. I mean, last year, 73 receptions, 634 yards, a couple of touchdowns. But he only played 12 games. And that's the thing. Will he be sturdy enough to play 18 games? That's a question. And as I said, football's hard on a body. Played 12 games last year. Will he play 12 this year? Will he play 16, 18 games this year? That's the question as guys get older.
We talk a lot on this podcast, and I'm sure you do too, sometimes your best asset is availability.
Absolutely. Yep, your best ability is availability all the time, not just in football, but in everything. How many times we talk about that in baseball, where they play 162 games, and guys have to play different positions sometimes in order to stay in the lineup. And you look at the Blue Jays and how many guys they have playing left field and right field, and sometimes playing in the infield. If you're healthy, if you can contribute, then you could be in the lineup. You just don't know where, and you just don't know when. But stay healthy, stay ready.
And speaking of the Elks in that first part of the season, now a lot of people dump on Trey Ford and say that he wasn't the quarterback that they wanted him to be. When you look at Mark Killam and you look at that coaching staff, they were all new to each other as well. They were trying to figure each other out while this was going on.
You hope that a second year with that same voice will create some consistency and stability with that team. Jed Roberts is a guy that I've talked to a bunch of times. Played 13 years with Edmonton. When they were good, he's still living in Edmonton, and I listen to him talk, and I feel terribly for him and for the fans in Edmonton that they've had to deal with the mess that they've had to deal with, and it's gone on for as long as it has. I feel for a fan base like that. I mean, not every team can be 15-3 or 13-5 or whatever. Everything goes in cycles.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, you might be at the bottom, but eventually you'll be at the top again. I mean, even Ottawa won a Grey Cup in 2016. If Ottawa can do it, then every team can.
Well, you look at the Rough Riders through the 80s. I mean, they go to the Grey Cup, they lose to Gabriel and the Rough Riders in the 76 game, and they don't reappear in the playoffs until 1988. That's hard to do.
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's really hard to do. But you go back to 81 and the 5-11 Rough Riders Ottawa Rough Riders getting into the playoffs and then getting to the Grey Cup.
And an 8-8 Saskatchewan Rough Riders did not.
And that became the impetus for the crossover. Yes.
They had to win the final game in BC, and absolutely torrential rain. And Greg Feger, front of a toss to the backfield, and it hits his hip, falls on the ground. The Lions recover. They score a touchdown. It's the only touchdown scored game one. And
then you look at BC, and they gave Edmonton everything they could handle in the Western Final that year as well. It was not a cakewalk for Edmonton. And then Ottawa comes out and is up 20-1 on them, 20-0 late in the second quarter, 20-1 at the end of the half. Hugh Campbell and Tom Wilkinson went to Warren Moon and said, "This is what you have to do. You can't just go for the long stuff all the time. You have to go for the shorter stuff. Dink and dunk. Take what Ottawa's going to give you." And he did. And then they got a couple of breaks on defense as well, where J.C. Watts fumbled the ball. And they were able to claw back into that game and then eventually win it at the end.
There's a team, I think, in Winniepg that plays as well.
The Blue Bombers. Tommy Neal is going to be an interesting fit with them. I'm curious to see what he's able to do. Last year, Canadian receiver, and Canadian receivers don't get the limelight, but he had 42 catches for 535 yards. He had 4 touchdowns.
And the West Final winning catch.
Yes, but he only played in 13 games, and he 2 of those games he didn't get a lot of action. So I'm curious to see, first of all, if he's able to last the whole season in Winniepg, and secondly, what he's going to be able to do there in their offense.
I think bringing in Tim White as well on that receiving core is another huge win for the Bombers. And as you said, Neal's Canadian passport, having him and Nick Dembski as your 1-2 Canadian receivers, I think is a pretty decent combination.
Well, what the Canadians allow a team to do is to move other guys around, move other American players around, and fill holes that they may have had with those guys. They got Javan Santos-Knox from Ottawa as a linebacker. I liked him in Ottawa. Jonathan Moxey, as you mentioned earlier. Jake Ceresna from Edmonton. Jarrell Broxton as well. That Winniepg team could light a few fires around the league.
Well, they also spent some big money on extending Evan Holm.
Yes.
And so you're talking about Canadians and ratio. Well,
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And what the best teams do in terms of management is exactly what you're saying, Don. Canadians in spots where sometimes Canadians don't necessarily fill those spots. And then you can move Americans into other spots where typically they'd use a Canadian.
Well, and I think the Winnipeg's biggest move in that regard is that running back, right? They've gone from Andrew Harris to Brady Oliveira. They've got Michael Chris Ike, who plays more of a fullback role, but is also Canadian. Matthew Peterson was a rookie last year out of University of Alberta, another Canadian. So they've really committed to having a national at that spot that no other team in the league really has put that kind of focus on. And again, that allows you to get another American maybe on your offensive line or somebody in some of those other roles that you don't expect to see.
And they have a quality of ability that allows them to be there and hold a position. It's not just as a placeholder, but it's as an actual contributor.
The core of that team, and I know Heath bristles every time I say that, but that core of that team is getting older. Eventually those wheels are going to come off, and then what?
But we're seeing that in numerous places, especially in the West.
Wow, but who's behind there? Zach Collaros. Who do you want to be your backup quarterback in Winnipeg right now if Collaros goes down?
History tells us that he will, and that's the $64,000 question. Whatever is when will he go down?
I'm all in on Taylor Algersma. I think that's the future of the Bombers. It doesn't look like it's maybe going to be in time for the 26th season. He's still pursuing opportunities south of the border, or hoping to pursue opportunities south of the border. But he's a guy that I think a lot of Bomber fans are excited about in the future. They've brought in a couple of interesting signings at quarterback as well. Bryce Perkins is getting a lot of hype. I mean, he's already 29 years old as well. So is that similar to what Calgary did last year with PJ Walker as their backup, bringing in a guy with that American pedigree and seeing what he can do? But you're right, Don. Collaros is the number one guy, and behind that, there's a lot of question marks.
I'm always concerned when an American guy comes up at the beginning of his time in Canada, because I think it takes American guys time to get used to 3 downs, to get used to the yard off the ball, to get used to the motion, the pre-snap motion, the width of the field, everything else. Like I go back to 81 and I look at Montreal, and Vince Ferragamo could never, ever totally acclimate to the Canadian game. Some guys can do it right away, but some guys can't. And I'm always curious to see how that goes, that transition goes from the US game to the Canadian game.
I don't know how severely hurt PJ Walker is coming into this season. Will he be ready? But a guy who performed well at the end of last season was Josh Love in Calgary. And he might be a guy that you have to pay attention to if Vernon Adams, who has another quarterback that is pretty brittle and usually misses some time.
And he's getting older too.
Yeah, he's 33 now.
I think it's interesting with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers that they finished 10-8 last year, which only got them in 4th place in the West. And you'd think the wheels have completely fallen off the franchise. 2024, 11-7, won the West for the Blue Bombers. So they had one fewer win, dropped 3 places in the standings. And I think they really have a strong belief that they can win again now, because you talk about the age, and these free agents that they brought in are all in that kind of 30 to 32 age. So not young talent. They're in a win now mode. They want to get one more for Zach on his way out.
But that coin flip, that roll of the dice, that one win is so important in the CFL. And if you squander a game, you can't lose the division in July or August, but it can keep you from winning it if you lose a game in July or August.
Well, you may say that Winnipeg isn't in trouble, but from 2022 on, they have been sliding backwards in the win column every year. And granted, 11-7 got them first place for one of them. But if they continue the slide, and it's been decremental all the way across, they're going to find themselves looking into the playoffs from the outside, not outside from the in.
The West is going to be great to watch this year because it looks like they've got 5 good teams.
Well, and the East is going to be a lot of fun too. If Ottawa gels, there could be some change.
It's going to be a lot more fun. It's going to be interesting too, because a lot of things are changing with the configurations of the field and all of the other things that are happening. I know friends of mine are concerned because they have tickets on those one of these little terraces that is on the north side of in Ottawa, and they're going to be moving one of the benches over to that side, because both of them were on the south side last year. And so it's taking away some of the people's drinking space. And I think some people are going to get upset by that.
Well, and I wonder too about Pill Zone in Mosaic Stadium in Saskatchewan, because depending on how they reconfigure in 2027, they may be further away from the field
or further downfield, one way or the other. Yeah, if it's in the end zone, there's an end zone terrace. They might move the terrace out to 5 yards.
Oh, that's a major reconfiguration in Mosaic. That's a lot of concrete.
I'm thinking Ottawa though. It could be done. But the thing too about that, the reconfiguration of the field, does that mean university football is going to be changed? Does that mean high school football is going to be changed? Is minor football all going to be changed? Are fields all over Canada going to have to be changed to accommodate this change in the CFL?
Well, British Columbia has always played on a 100-yard field anyway, all the way up to university. Now, in university, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be so hard for them because they've already done it. But for the other 9 provinces that play football, to talk to U Sport to find out, because there's a lot of shared facilities and there are independent facilities. What do you do with all of this?
Well, every year in Ottawa, they have the Panda game, which is the game between Ottawa U and Carleton. And it's always played at Lansdowne Park because they've got a stadium that can hold 26,000 people. They can't have it there anymore because the field isn't going to be the same as the field that they play on at Ottawa U or at Carleton.
Unless they change.
Right. Yeah.
A big question.
Yep.
And the biggest one is Percival Molson Stadium at McGill in Montreal. That one is owned by the university, and the CFL team is the tenant. And if I got my cities correct, Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, also the university teams play in the CFL stadiums. So those are 3 other ones where that configuration is going to be changing soon. And what does U Sport do?
That's a great question. That is a great question. And we'll have to wait to find out the answers.
Howie, thank you so much for joining us again. Where can people find your podcast and where can they find you on the socials?
Our podcast is called The Sports Lunatics Show. It's a sports history podcast. We say we're 2 regular guys who love sports history. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. We have a Facebook page, the Sports Lunatics radio show page. You can go in there. There's always things happening in there. The members are keeping things hopping. My co-host Sean is in there all the time. I go in there sometimes. Though that's the big place to find us on Facebook. If you want to get my book, get it on Amazon. It's called An Unlikely Story. It's about the 81 Ottawa Rough Riders, their travails through the entire season until the final third when they shored up their position at quarterback and they shored up their defensive secondary and managed to win a few games, enough in the East to get them into the playoffs. They held off the Montreal Alouettes and shocked the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the East Final and then played Edmonton in the Grey Cup. They were 22.5-point underdogs and they almost won a Grey Cup. But get the book on Amazon. I'll be thrilled for your support.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.